Hi everyone, welcome to Poisonous People. Today we're going to start an exciting topic that's one of my favorite things to discuss, and that is role theory. So this is going to be a series, a very short series. It's only 2 videos long. And in this video, we're going to cover some glossary terms to help us understand role theory. And in part 2, we're going to take the same glossary terms that we learn in this video, and we're going to apply them to the concept of role development. Now, role theory is something that a lot of people may have encountered before. It's a term that's used a lot in sociology. But what's unique about what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be applying role theory to the context of narcissistic relationships. And hopefully this will help us understand these dynamics better, whether you're a narcissist or not. So let's get started by looking at what role theory actually is. So when we're talking about role theory, of course, we have to first define what a role actually is. And a role is defined as the set of rights, duties, norms, behaviors, and expectations that correspond to a particular position. Or if you've studied this in sociology, you might be accustomed to the word status. A role is more or less a prescription of how individuals should behave. Role theory, on the other hand, is the idea that individuals have various roles in life, and most of everyday activity consists of the acting out of these roles. That's all life is. Life is just us acting out these roles. So an individual's behavior is always going to be context specific. It's going to be specific to that role. And the theater is a metaphor for role theory. Now, as I said, many of you might be familiar with role theory from sociology. I am going to be coming at this from the perspective of psychodrama. Psychodrama is not exactly the same thing as drama therapy, but they do have a lot of similarities as far as some therapeutic approaches are concerned. Both drama therapy and psychodrama utilize the concept of role theory. Psychodrama was created by this man here, Jacob Moreno. He is considered to be the father of psychodrama. He is also considered to be one of the co-founders of role theory, alongside other names you might recognize like Ralph Linton in sociology and George Herbert Mead in social psychology. Role theory is a non-pathologizing way of conceptualizing personality, social issues, and mental health issues. And it is universal. It's cross-cultural. Every single human being can relate to this concept. And that's another reason why it's so non-pathologizing, because role theory does explain so much of our day-to-day conflict and the burdens that we bear. Everyone experiences strife and disappointment and distress over some of the roles and what their expectations are for us. So I love this concept because it helps us all understand what it's like to be human. And the byproduct of that, of course, is greater empathy. So this is another reason why this is so important when we're working with issues of narcissism. Moreno described 3 kinds of roles. First, you have the somatic roles, and these are roles that pertain to the physical body. So in other words, sleeper, eater, runner, anything that you're going to be doing with your physical body. For instance, right now, I am in the role of speaker and you are in the role of listener. And the somatic roles are the very first roles we encounter in life. As babies, we hold roles such as crier, crawler, eater, pooper, burper. And so these are the very first actions that we're taking as human beings. One thing about somatic roles is that on the surface, you might not think that they have much of a role to play in mental health. How is me being a burper or a crier going to affect my life in general? Is it really that important to see me in certain roles? And the answer is yes. And I'm going to give you some examples of that later in this video. Then we have psychodramatic roles, and these are the roles that pertain to the person psychologically. These roles are based on fantasy, play, games, imagination, and dreams. And these roles describe the way that we see ourselves and the person we would like to become. So in other words, these might be roles that we wish we held, and these roles might exist in our minds before they actually become externalized in social reality. Some examples of psychodramatic roles might include creative thinker, imaginer, problem solver, etc. Archetypes are very common examples of psychodramatic roles. And then finally, we have social roles. And so these are the ones that are typically covered in sociology. Social roles are the roles that pertain to the relationship that we have with others. Parent, child, student, teacher, doctor, patient. And as you can see, most social roles are either reciprocal or complementary. A reciprocal role would be one that kind of feeds off each other. So parent and child. Complementary roles would be ones that obviously kind of enhance each other. So friend and friend. And so what you see here with these three types of roles is a very complete picture of a human being. The somatic roles correspond to body, the psychodramatic roles correspond to mind, and the social roles correspond to society. So you have body, mind, and society. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Moreno believed that each person is a composite of the roles he or she plays. So in other words, the self emerges from the roles. It's not the other way around. The roles do not emerge from the self. The self is a puzzle, and each role that we play would be a piece in that puzzle. And when we put them all together, we get this complete picture of the self. When we get that backwards, it's almost like we don't have any puzzle pieces at all, but we're somehow expecting a self to magically just manifest. And there's no picture there. We look at the table, we expect there to be a photo or of a beautiful lake or a forest scene, but without those pieces, that complete picture is non-existent. So a lot of times with narcissism or people that just struggle with who am I in life, they're looking within to a self that's empty and non-existent. And then what they'll do is they'll just say, well, I'll just pick a role. I'll just be the cool guy, or I'll just be this responsible person, or I'll just be this artistic person. And then there's a lot of confusion because it doesn't feel right. And the reason why it's the other way around is because much of the roles that we play in life are not chosen. They are thrust upon us by society. So if you're born to certain parents, you didn't choose the role of child. You just are a child, whether you like it or not. If you were blessed with a high IQ, you're going to have a psychodramatic role as an intellectual. And that's not something that you choose. That's just something that was given to you. It just happened to you. Now, there are some roles that we do choose. Like we can choose to enroll in a university and now we're in the role of student. Or we can choose to begin learning a new language or a musical instrument. And now we've taken on the role of musician or Spanish speaker. But most of our roles are not chosen for us. So in order to understand the self, we first have to look at the roles that we have, the roles that we were just given without choice. And then we can start to flesh out a self. And then we can start to look at what roles do we want to choose. So that's very, very important, especially for people that are struggling with the question of who am I? So this next point I want to make is even more important than the first thing that I just said. And this is the idea of what makes a healthy self? What is the difference between a healthy self and a dysfunctional self? Moreno believed that a healthy person has access to a wide range of roles available to him or her and flexibility in playing those roles. Dysfunction occurs when a person has a lack of social or psychodramatic roles. A lot of times I hear people say that narcissists are two different people depending on who they're with. And it's actually the opposite. Healthy people are able to shift effortlessly between all the roles they play. People with NPD, on the other hand, they are experiencing a dysfunction of the self because they're not able to shift back and forth between those roles. And so it's more common to see a narcissist kind of take on this more flat, static, wooden representation of who they are. So, for example, if that narcissist prides themselves on being a professor, they're going to make sure that every single person knows they are a professor. If that narcissist is a musician, that's going to be like the one role that they hinge their whole identity on. You're also going to find that there's difficulty shifting into other roles like the mistake maker. The flawed person. A narcissist is not able to deal with certain roles that he or she finds shameful. And so they're going to reject those roles, which is also why there's dysfunction. There's this pressure to conform the entire self into this one static role. So that's a very, very important fundamental thing that we need to understand when it comes to narcissism. This is one of the reasons there's so much inner turmoil, because narcissists are constantly fighting against many of the natural roles that they have, whether they like them or not. And usually they don't like those roles. And so they're rejecting them, and they're going to put themselves into the one role and try to be that person all the time. So it could be the athlete, the musician, the superstar, professor. Psychodramatically, they might be forcing themselves into the role of perfectionist, flawless, perfect human. Those roles really are fantasy related, because there is no possible way in social reality that anybody could perform the role of flawless, perfect human being. So this is going to bring us to our very first glossary term, and that is role lock. Role lock occurs when somebody gets stuck in a role. And when someone gets stuck in a role, they naturally don't have as much access to other roles. Examples of role lock in mental health would be the addict or the alcoholic. Somebody can get locked in this cycle of addiction and they can't find their way out, and then their whole life revolves around this role of the addict. In my practice, the two most common role lock examples that I encounter is the perfectionist. I don't get many narcissists in my practice, but I do get a lot of people who are not narcissists and they are perfectionists, and they are locked into this idea that they have to work, and they have to be the hero and make everything perfect and wonderful. And that causes a lot of distress in their lives. And this is where I said, this is one of the primary examples of where a somatic role might be helpful. Because a lot of times when I'm working with someone who is a perfectionist, I will say to them, it's time to stop being in the role of hard worker. And now we're going to enter the role of rester or relaxer or sleeper. So I might say to that person, every night at 10 p.m., you're going to stop working and you're going to switch into the role of sleeper, and you're going to go to bed and you're going to rest. Or I might say, Next week, I want you to take a personal day. And that whole day, I want you to just immerse yourself in the somatic role of relaxer. And for most perfectionists, that's very difficult because they might be physically relaxing on the beach or by the pool, but internally and mentally, their mind is still racing over all the things that they have to do. So this is one of the ways that somatic roles would come into play. Another type of role lock I see are codependent people. I would say like 90% of my practice is some form of codependency. Codependent people will get locked into this idea that I need to be a caretaker. I have to fix this. I have to help this person. I have to be the hero. I have to be the rescuer. And so they get stuck in that role. And this is why they have such poor boundaries, because a lot of times setting boundaries means putting that role temporarily to rest, and saying no to somebody else so that that person can enter a different role. And as Moreno said, this is the reason for dysfunction in oneself. So the next term we're going to look at these two together, role strain and role conflict. Role strain refers to the tension among responsibilities for a single role. So for example, if somebody is a student, they have several different responsibilities. They have to attend class on time. They have to do their homework. They have to write a term paper. They might need to take notes. They may have to take a test. And sometimes all of these responsibilities can conflict. There might be a need to write a term paper, but if the term paper is due at 9 a.m. and I haven't finished the term paper, I may have to make a decision between staying in the library and finishing the term paper versus going to class on time. It's not possible if you're in that situation to fulfill both responsibilities perfectly. I need to finish this paper, and so the responsibility to get to class on time, I'm going to have to let that go. That's going to have to suffer because I can't do both at once. Role strain is, in my experience, one of the most common things that's going to contribute to perfectionism, whether you are a narcissist or not. There's going to be this pressure that you put on yourself to keep all these balls in the air, keep all these plates spinning at once. And these things can't always be completed to perfection. These responsibilities sometimes fall by the wayside. And the person who puts a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves to get all those things done perfectly, they can't handle that, because if something should happen where there is a mistake or they didn't do the role according to their standards, then they slip into the role of imperfect human being. And this is a role that they've rejected. And as I said, that's, according to Moreno, why there's dysfunction. People who are more self-confident or who don't really put that much pressure on themselves, they can easily slip into that role of imperfect human being and be fine. And they'll just say, well, I couldn't handle everything. Maybe I need some help. Role conflict, on the other hand, refers to the conflict between two or more roles that one person holds. So I'm going to give you two examples, a social example and a psychodramatic example. A social example might be a teenage mom. So this person is still in the role of high school student, let's say. They are a senior, and there are certain expectations and privileges and desires that that person has as a high school senior. That person may want to finish high school on time. That person may want to attend the prom. That person might want to look at colleges and do all the things that a high school senior would do. But unfortunately, they have this conflicting role of mother because they just gave birth to a baby. And so the responsibilities of a mother are now conflicting with the responsibilities of being a student. And so that person is going to experience conflict where they may not be able to go to the prom, or they may not be able to have fun with their friends the way other high school students might have fun, who don't have to take care of a child at home. So this creates role conflict in the context of social roles. Let's now consider a psychodramatic example of role conflict. So let's say somebody has a side to them that's very responsible, but there's also a part of them that's very creative. And let's say that they would love to make a living as an artist. They want to be a painter, but the responsible part of them knows that painting is not going to pay the bills, at least maybe not for a long time until I get myself established. So that person decides to take a very secure, solid, full-time job, 9 to 5 with benefits. Let's say they decide to be a bank teller. And what's going to happen is that their responsible role is being fulfilled and nourished, and they're going to feel awesome in that role of responsible person. They're going to have money in their pocket. They're going to have a nice paycheck. They're going to have all their bills paid, and they're going to feel great about that. But the creative role is never being acted out. They never have time to paint because they're always at work. The less time that they spend in that role of painter, the more depressed they can become. And so role conflict is one of the things that role theory would say contributes to depression. Not being able to have two conflicting roles acted out equally, or having to choose between two valid roles that really do express valid parts of the complete self. An example of role conflict for a narcissist might be this idea that I'm the best thing in the world. I'm better than everybody else. But yet then there's this other role that says, I suck. I'm a horrible person. I'm just disgusting. And I can't believe anybody would want to be friends with me. And so these two roles can sometimes be in conflict, and they're just not congruent with each other. And this can also cause a narcissistic person a lot of personal internal turmoil. And you can see how role strain and role conflict can go together, because sometimes if there's a lot of responsibilities for one role and then there's a lot of responsibilities for another role, it's going to be very hard if those roles are strained and then they become in conflict with one another. The next two terms we're going to look at are role expectation and role demand. Role expectation is how we expect a role to feel before we take it on. Our expectations of a role can result in either a positive, negative, or neutral experience. So, for example, somebody might say, I think being a teacher seems like it would be a cool job. You know, you get the summer off, you get these nice early hours, and you have your whole afternoon to yourself. I think I'd like that job. And then they decide to become a teacher. Once they are in that role, they may find that the role doesn't meet those expectations. They may say, gee, I didn't expect these kids to be such brats. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much grading I have to do. And so their expectation that this job was going to be awesome, it wasn't fulfilled in the actual taking of the role. On the other hand, somebody can have a low expectation of something and it turns out great. Somebody might say, oh, I never want to get married. That seems like it would be a prison. And then they get married and they realize, wow, this is pretty cool. Or the expectation could be neutral. I have to serve on jury duty. This is going to be boring. And then they show up for jury duty and it's really boring. And so it's exactly the way they expected it to be. Role demand, on the other hand, this refers to the expectations we put on others to play a role in a certain way. A very common example of role demand, we've all been there. If we've been to college, we've all experienced that one professor who doesn't seem to understand that we have a life outside of his class. We have other classes, we have a job, we have a family, we have a personal life, and this professor will assign so much homework and so much reading in a short amount of time. This is somebody who's putting an unreasonable demand on those students and expecting those students to act out their role of student in a certain way, in the way that the professor thinks they should act out those roles. In a similar fashion, both narcissists and the people who love them can do the same exact thing. When it comes to narcissistic relationships, we can probably right away recognize how this happens for a narcissist, right? The narcissist is expecting this relationship to be, the ultimate expression of love and fulfillment. And they go into the role of your significant other thinking this is going to be great. And they put demands on you to be this very perfect person. And they're going to expect you to behave in a certain way according to what they understand a significant other is supposed to be. And a lot of times, a narcissist doesn't understand that we are capable of multiple roles, because narcissists, as I said earlier in the video, they themselves are typically in role lock. So a lot of times they will expect us to be in role lock, and they'll almost demand that we are in role lock. You're supposed to be my girlfriend. You're supposed to act like this. You're supposed to do this. And then they become very upset when we don't behave according to those demands. Now, what might shock you is that we do the same exact thing to the narcissist. Many people enter the relationship with the narcissist thinking this is an adult, mature relationship. It's going to be healthy. It's going to be fulfilling. And then they realize that the narcissist is not behaving the way that they expected, or I should use the proper term, the way that they demand. And as recently as this week, I saw something on YouTube, and the statement was, I should not have to explain basic human decency to a grown man. And I got to tell you, I agree with that statement. I don't think that we should have to explain basic human decency to a grown adult. But the problem is that we're seeing that narcissistic partner only in terms of the grown adult. We're only seeing them in that one role of grown man. We're forgetting that the narcissist also plays the role of narcissist. So you might demand that the narcissist simply behave according to the norms of simple human decency, whatever that means for you. You might demand that the narcissist go to therapy, that the narcissist change. And I would even say that's why that question is so popular on the internet. Can a narcissist change? The reason why people are so consumed with that question is because of role demand, because they're not able to accept the narcissist the way they are. They're not satisfied that the narcissist is dysfunctional, and there's a subliminal or even unconscious desire that this narcissist fill our demands and be the person that we want them to be. So a lot of people don't realize that this role expectation and role demand, it works both ways, especially when you're in social roles with one another. As I said, they are reciprocal. The next two terms we're going to look at are role fatigue and role relief. Role fatigue occurs when we experience exhaustion from being stuck in a particular role. A common example of role fatigue would be caretakers, people who are caring for an elderly parent. Maybe that parent has dementia or Parkinson's, and there's so much pressure to be there for that parent. There's so much responsibility that over time, they can get locked into that role because it takes priority. And after you've been locked in a role for a long time, you start to get very exhausted. Role relief, on the other hand, is exactly the way it sounds. It is the relief that we feel from being de-rolled or released from that role. There is a very well-known concept when it comes to NPD known as the mask, and both narcissists and non-narcissists alike will refer to the narcissist habit of masking. This is the idea that the narcissist puts on a role to hide another role. I personally reject this idea. I think that this is a misnomer. I think it's inaccurate. What's really happening is that the narcissist is spending too much time in a role that is very tiring for them. And so over time, they're going to feel locked in this role and they're going to experience role fatigue. And when that happens, there's going to be a point where the narcissist cannot continue in this role anymore. And so they abandon that role, whatever it was, polite, kind, sacrificial, understanding person. And they're going to then go to a role that's more comfortable, which might be more self-absorbed or entitled or whatever it is. Last but not least, we have role self-congruence. This refers to whether or not a role that we've taken is congruent with the other roles that we've already established and accepted. So usually when a role is self-congruent, it agrees with other roles that we play and it fits in with the rest of the self. It agrees with all the other roles that comprise the self. So an example of something that might not be self-congruent, let's say somebody is very good with numbers, they're very analytical, they actually enjoy working with numbers, they decide that they want to be an accountant, and then they get a job at this accounting firm. And they discover that this accounting firm is a little bit shady. They kind of fudge the numbers. They're unethical. They cut corners. This person at first said, this is the perfect job for me. But the person then realizes, well, there's more to me than just this job. I'm an ethical person. I don't feel comfortable fudging numbers. I don't feel comfortable being deceitful. And so the role of accountant is certainly congruent with who they are and the rest of their self. But the role of employee in this particular job, that is not congruent. And so that person might make the decision to end that role, to relieve themselves of that role. They might quit that job and find a job as an accountant elsewhere. Now, sometimes this can cause problems, again, for a perfectionist person or even a codependent person. They start a job at this unethical firm and they realize this is not congruent with who I am. But if I quit the job, the act of quitting is also not congruent with who I am because I'm a loyal person and I don't like quitting and giving up on people. And so now we've got role conflict, as we mentioned earlier in the video. So you can see how all these concepts kind of overlap and interact with one another. One of the ways that we might see role self-congruence operating in a narcissistic relationship is if a narcissist has decided that their role of choice is the cool guy. So remember, this is a form of role lock. I'm the cool guy, so that's who I'm gonna be everywhere I go. In every aspect of life, I'm cool guy. I'm cool guy at school, I'm cool guy at work, I'm cool guy with my friends, I'm cool guy with my girlfriend, I'm cool guy online. And something happens, let's say, where that narcissistic person has an argument with one of their friends and there's a big blowout. And the narcissist may actually be tempted to reach out to that person for maybe a split second, but they will reject that notion because reaching out to my buddy is not what a cool guy would do, right? It's not congruent with how I see myself. So I'm going to make my buddy reach out to me. This is where either that narcissistic person will burn that bridge because a cool guy is not going to apologize. A cool guy is not going to admit fault. A cool guy is cool. They're perfect. And they'll walk away from that relationship. If they do come back, it's going to be in the form of a Hoover because that's what a cool guy would do. A cool guy would Hoover. A cool guy would just be like, hey, what's going on? Maybe we should hang out and get a drink or something. That's how they're going to handle that. Now, if that friend or that romantic partner is more codependent, they're going to experience the same exact thing that the narcissist experienced, only their experience is going to be congruent with how they see themselves. So that friend or that romantic partner, that ex, might say, you know, this guy's a real jerk. They're not going to see him as a cool guy. They're going to see him as a jerk. And they're going to say, I have a mind to tell him off, or I should just block this idiot. But blocking and telling someone off is not congruent with how that more codependent person sees themselves. So they might be tempted for a split second to do the healthy thing, but it's not congruent with how they see themselves. They see themselves as forgiving, loyal, and that's why they're going to go back and patch things up with that narcissistic person. So there's many more terms that go along with role theory, but we're not going to cover all of those. These are probably the most popular terms that you're going to come across. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at role development. We're going to see how roles are formed. And in order to really understand how roles are formed, we need to understand this terminology. So follow me over to the next video where I'm going to apply these glossary terms to the process of role development. I'm Jen Guerriero, and this is Poisonous People. Thanks for watching.